Greetings and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Mailbox Configuration. Creating databases and mailboxes to go in those databases, that's all part of what we do as Exchange administrators. But we have to go one step further, but Exchange is really a robust solution that has a lot of different settings for those mailboxes. And so mailbox settings might include enabling or disabling certain features like unified messaging, or establishing policy settings and then applying those policies like an address book policy, or it might include delivery options, message size restrictions, and much more. So in this lesson we're going to discuss the various mailbox settings, we'll demonstrate a few, and then we'll apply that to our scenario and we'll see what it might be like in a real working environment if we had tasks that were put in front of us that relate to configuring mailbox settings. Okay, so let's get started. As far as how you configure your mailbox settings, well, you can use the EAC, the Exchange Admin Center, to configure a single user, or you can select more than one user and perform what's called a bulk edit change. You can also use the Exchange Management Shell, the EMS, which may offer you greater flexibility. If you were going to use the EMS, you would use the get-mailbox commandlet to determine which mailboxes you're going to apply the changes to, and then use the set-mailbox commandlet in order to make those changes. That's for most settings. There are still a few additional settings where you may need to look at other commandlets in order to make those changes. But in our case, in this lesson, we're going to stick with the EAC for all of our configuration options. Some of the common mailbox configuration options include things like individual mailbox quota settings and/or deleted item retention settings. So in our discussion on database configuration, you saw that you were able to establish quotas for the database itself for all mailboxes within that database. However, if you establish individual mailbox quota settings, those settings will trump any database settings. So what you apply to the individual mailbox takes precedence. And then you'll note that we have deleted item retention settings on individual mailboxes, but we do not have individual mailbox retention settings. So that's established on the database level as far as the number of days that can pass where a mailbox is deleted and can still be restored without going to backup. But when it comes to individual mailboxes, there's no item in the EAC that allows us to change that time. In addition, sent and received message size restrictions, that's also part of common mailbox configuration options. So you can say that you don't want an individual to send messages that are beyond a certain size or receive messages that are too large beyond a certain size. And so we can configure that. We can configure send as and/or send on behalf of settings. So when it comes to having, let's say, an assistant who can send emails on your behalf or send it as you, these are settings that are part of the mailbox configuration options. And then specific policy settings or features enabled. This is also part of mailbox configuration. So things like unified messaging, Exchange ActiveSync, the policy for Exchange ActiveSync. This is all part of mailbox configuration. Now some of these features are enabled by default, like Exchange ActiveSync, and others are not enabled by default, like unified messaging. So this is based upon which features are commonly used, like Exchange ActiveSync, that's common, as opposed to unified messaging, which really just depends on an individual organization to make the decision to use unified messaging. So if your organization is not using that, and in many organizations they aren't using it, well then there's no point in turning on that feature by default. Okay, so talking about it is one thing. Let's go jump over to our server and let's see how we would configure these options through the EAC. So here we are on our Windows Server 2012 system, and we're already logged in to the Exchange Admin Center. We're going to take a look at Cindy Waters' account, and we'll see the various properties there for mailbox management. But keep in mind, the EAC is one way to adjust accounts. We know the Exchange Management Shell is the other way. But we can also perform tasks in bulk through the EAC. For example, if we have Cindy Waters selected and we select another account, notice here on the right that we have now bulk edit changes. Obviously, you can't do everything through bulk edit. There are certain changes that apply to individuals that you cannot do on a bulk scale. Like if you're changing the literal address for Cindy Waters, well, that is something that would only be her address, so you would not change it on a bulk level. But there are other things, for example, organization information. Let's say these two individuals have the same title or departments or company. You can make these changes, or the same manager. So some things can be done in bulk. Let's just take a look at Cindy Waters' account here. You can see that we can make some changes here on the right. But if we double click her account, we look at the mailbox here, and we can see that we have general information on the general tab, and we can basically make some changes here, or we can click more options and see additional information. Notice we can hide her account from address lists. We can require password change on the next logon. If we go to mailbox usage, we see the last logon that Cindy performed. We also see the amount of space that's being used of her 2 GB quota. We can click more options, and it's here that we're able to adjust the quota. So currently she's using the default quota settings from the mailbox database, but we could customize the settings, and we can give her an unlimited quota. We can provide a specific quota that perhaps is less or greater than what the default quota is. It's really up to us. Down here we see default retention settings from the mailbox database, and so that relates to the deleted item retention. We can see that we can change that. We can customize the settings and provide her specific deleted item retention settings. We'll leave it as the default for her. We go to contact information, and here we can see this is information that we can put in. This is connected back to Active Directory. So if this information were in Active Directory, it would show up here. If we change it here, it will show up then in Active Directory. So the two are linked. We see there are more options here as well. Organization, we saw this with bulk management. We have title, department, company, manager. So again, this is all linked back to Active Directory. Email address. And typically a mailbox user has a primary email address that they use. You can add additional ones. You can change this email address. So there's things you can do here. You can provide them with additional email addresses if they have additional ones that can be added in. If we go to mailbox features, we can see here it says sharing policy, role assignment policy. The defaults are applied. There is no retention policy at this time. There is no address book policy, so there's nothing there. If we scroll down, you can see that we have various features that we can enable or disable. So for example, the unified messaging feature is disabled, but we can enable it. Mobile devices, these are enabled by default, but we can disable that feature for this user, so they would not be able to connect with an Exchange ActiveSync connection. You see that IMAP is enabled, we can disable it. POP3 is enabled, we can disable it, and so on. So there's a lot we can do through the features, but it's really down here at the bottom we see some other things that it's more than just enabling or disabling. We have mail flow options. If we click View Details, we can see we can establish forwarding. We can establish a recipient limit with a maximum number of recipients. We see here message size restrictions. This is important when it comes to establishing a message size. Let's say we want to make sure that our users don't send or receive messages beyond a certain size. Well, we can do that in bulk. We can do that where that's for the entire organization and we can have a default setting, or we can go in and we can establish specific settings for individual users. Then there's message delivery restrictions. Here's where we can say accept messages from all senders, only senders in the following list, and then we can provide the list. We can require that all senders are authenticated. We can reject messages from specific senders. So at this point, the default is that we accept messages from all senders and we reject messages from no senders. But we can change this if we'd like. And in some cases, you might want to do that. Under Member Of, this quickly will show you what distribution groups this person is a member of. In this case, Cindy is not a member of any distribution groups. Under Mail Tip, you can create a mail tip to display when people send email to this user, and that mail tip can have a maximum of 175 characters. So that's kind of new, and it's interesting to think about how you might utilize that. It may not be something that you want to use all the time. You don't want to get into the habit of having multiple mail tips for individuals and so forth, but it's there if you do want to establish a mail tip. And then we have mailbox delegation. And here's where you can establish the send as and send on behalf of permissions. So if you give somebody send as permission, then they can send a message and it will appear to have been sent by the mailbox owner, as opposed to send on behalf of, which is where if a person sends a message, the from line in any message sent by a delegate indicates that the message was sent by the delegate on behalf of the mailbox owner. So just a slight difference there in terms of the trust level involved. If you trust a person implicitly, then send as might work just fine. If you want to make it clear that the person sending the email was not you, but someone who was delegated to send email on your behalf, then you would choose this option. And so this was just a quick walking tour through all of the different settings that you can establish on the mailbox, the different management settings that you can configure. You can see that it's not rocket science, it's easy to work with, and it's good to know what settings are possible and available so that when you do have to perform this in a working environment, you know where to find these options. Let's jump back over to our slides and let's put ourselves back into our scenario where we're doing work for SpyTech Prime. And they have specific requests for us in terms of mailbox settings, especially with regard to one user named James Reed. Let's find out what tasks we have assigned to us. So bringing our SpyTech Prime scenario back into the discussion, in order for us to be provided with tasks that we might perform in a real-world environment, we see here that the SpyTech Prime organization has a policy that states that all send-receive message sizes should be restricted to 10 megabyte files. Now that's not the default, so we have to go and make that change for the entire organization. At the same time, James Reed is a newly hired executive for SpyTech Prime. And as an executive, there are mailbox configuration changes that have to be made to his settings. And there's a policy for executives that requires us to change certain features about his mailbox. So for starters, James Reed will have no mailbox quota. He will have an unlimited quota for his mailbox. Deleted items will be retained for 90 days. A 20 megabyte send-receive message size will be established for James' mailbox. And Cindy Waters, who is James' assistant, will be granted send on behalf of permissions for James' mailbox. Now for SpyTech Prime, these are settings that all executives get. They get an unlimited mailbox quota, a 90-day deleted item retention, a 20 megabyte send-receive message size, and their assistant is granted send on behalf of permissions. So we have to jump over to our server and first enforce the first part, the policy of 10 megabyte send-receive message size restrictions. And then we'll do some work on James' account as a new executive that's been hired, and we'll make these changes. Alright, and so here we are back on our Windows Server 2012 system, and we have our Exchange Admin Center up and running already. Now the first part of our scenario is that we have a policy that makes it so that individuals within the organization can only send or receive emails that are under 10 megabytes. Now, the default setting is higher than that. In fact, we haven't really talked about this yet, but if we go over to MailFlow, you can see that we have receive connectors and we have send connectors, and based upon the connector itself, you can establish a maximum message size for sending or receiving emails. And you can do this for the entire organization based upon the connectors. The nice thing is you can also have different send and receive properties. So based upon the connector, you might allow a greater size level. So let's say when it comes to messages that are just going to and from the internet, you might have a message size of 10 megabytes. But if you are partnered with a specific company and you have send and receive connectors going to and from that company, you might establish a larger message size because there's a greater level of trust, or perhaps the expectation is that larger file sizes are going to be needed because of the work that you're doing back and forth between the two companies. So it's nice to have that flexibility. You can see here that for this receive connector, there is a maximum receive message size of 35 megabytes. And so this is our Hub Transport default receive connector. Let's actually change this setting. Now we can do it in a couple of different ways. Here, if we open this up, we can change the maximum receive message size. We can make it 20 if we'd like, and click Save. And now you see it's changed that maximum receive message size. However, another way to make changes like this would be through the Exchange Management shell. And so we have the shell already open. Let's just quickly throw in the command and make it that 10 megabyte maximum message size. So the way we would do this is set-receive connector. We would put in the connector name. Let's just make sure we have it right. It's default POS EX2K13, and then dash max message size 10 megabytes. All right, and it says that it's done. If we refresh here, now you can see we did change that receive message size to 10 megabytes, and so that's perfect. At this point, we don't have a send connector, so there's no point in worrying about the send size. When we do create one, for this organization, we'll make sure that the send size is 10 megabytes. And so that's the policy for this organization. However, you'll recall that our next point of business is to make sure that one of our recipients, James Reed here, that he gets an alternate set of settings for his send and receive message sizes. So let's go into his properties. So the first request for James as an executive is that he have no mailbox quota. So we're going to click mailbox usage. We'll click more options, and then here under the options for the quota, notice it says use the default quota settings. We're going to click customize the settings for this mailbox, and then we're just going to make sure that this is all set to unlimited so that we have no trouble with James's mailbox. At the same time, the other option that we need to change here is we need to customize the settings for the mailbox and alter the deleted item retention settings from 14. We're going to make this 90 days, and we're going to click Save. Okay, so those settings are finished. We go back in, and if we go to Mailbox Features, and if we scroll down to the bottom, what we're going to do is we're going to change the message size restrictions. We'll click View Details, and then we can change the sent messages and received messages maximum message size. And so here, if we click Sent Messages, we want it to be 20 megabytes. So you can see that it's in kilobytes that we have to make the maximum message size. So 20 megabytes is the equivalent of 20,480 kilobytes. The same for received messages. We're going to change his received messages to 20,480 kilobytes, and we'll say OK there. The next thing we need to do is grant Cindy Waters the send on behalf of permissions. So we're going to go to Mailbox Delegation, and down here it says send on behalf of. We're going to click the plus sign, and we see Cindy Waters right here. We'll double click, make sure her name is added here, and we click OK. So now Cindy Waters has the send on behalf of permissions for the mailbox of James Reed. So we've completed all of the tasks for James Reed. We've made sure he has no mailbox quota, even though the database that he's in does have a mailbox quota. And his deleted items will be retained for 90 days, even though the default is 14. He has a 20 megabyte send receive message size, even though the organization's policy is 10 megabytes. And Cindy Waters has been granted send on behalf of permissions for James' account. We'll click Save. So there's quite a bit, as you can see, to configuring mailbox settings. You know what? Let's jump over to a Windows 8 client system. Let's log in as James and see what happens when we send a message that is actually larger than 20 megabytes. And let's also log in as Cindy, and let's see what happens when Cindy wants to send an email on behalf of James. Just in case you've never seen this from the Outlook side, it's important to not only know how to establish these types of mailbox settings, but also to be able to explain to your end users how these various settings can benefit them and how to work with these settings. There's always that end user side to this where all the work you do in Exchange is really worthless if your end users don't really know how to work proficiently with their Outlook clients. So it's important for you to know how to perform these tasks as well. Alright, so here we are logged in as James Reed. If we just type in Outlook, we see Outlook 2013 is installed. We have not started Outlook 2013 for James just yet, so this is his first time opening it up. So we're going to run through the process of connecting his account. We click Next. It says, do you want to set up Outlook to connect to an email account? Yes is the default. We click Next. And because we're connected into Active Directory and James is logged into the domain and Exchange is all Active Directory aware and so forth, basically Outlook can just find James's mailbox. So here we see the email address is already included. We click Next. It gives us a security alert because of the certificate. The security certificate was issued by a company that we haven't chosen to trust. So this is the default certificate for the Exchange server. With a production Exchange server, you'd want to make sure that you have certificates installed before you have clients connecting up. And so we're going to do that in the near future here with a future lesson. But for now, we're just going to say yes, we want to proceed. And it pretty much does all the rest of the work. We click Finish. We're going to use recommended settings and click Accept. Okay, so there's Outlook 2013 for you. And the thing we want to do at this point is do a test of sending an email where the email contains an attachment that's larger than 20 megabytes and what actually happens for James when he does that. So we'll click New Email. And from here we can just send this to anyone. Let's send it over to Cindy Waters. We click the To button, which gives us our address book. We say OK. The subject is attachment. We click Insert, Attach File. You can see here we have a large video file we're going to attach. It's an AVI file, and it's about 40 megabytes in size. So this is definitely over James's send file size restriction. We click Insert, and then it says the file you're attaching is bigger than the server allows. Try putting the file in a shared location and sending a link instead. We say OK. So now let's try something that's a little bit more within his speed. So what if we brought that down under 20 megabytes and we tried to attach a file that was under 20 megabytes? We click Attach File again. This time we'll go to Videos, and here we have that under 20 megabyte video file. So we'll click Insert, and now we see two things. First of all, we see that it allows us to attach the message. However, who are we sending it to? We're sending it to Cindy Waters. Well, guess what? It's too large for Cindy. So it will not be able to send the message to Cindy Waters because it's too large. So even though we've changed the restriction settings for James here, the settings still apply to Cindy. And so it gives us this mail tip that tells us, look, you may be able to send this message, but Cindy won't be able to receive it. So that's nice. It's good to have a mail tip like that. And it's good to know that the restrictions that we've put in place, they are absolutely enforced by Exchange. Okay, so now let's jump out of here and let's log in as Cindy and let's see how she would send a message on behalf of James. Alright, so let's open up Outlook for Cindy. Now what we're going to do at this point is click New Email. And we're going to have to add one little thing here. We're going to look at Options and then put in the From box. And you can see this is now coming from Cindy Waters. If we click the down arrow, we can click Other Email Addresses. And here, Sent From. James Reed. To, let's send it to herself. We click Send. And you can see that it says here, Cindy Waters on behalf of James Reed. So even though it says James Reed, we know that it was sent on behalf of James Reed. She doesn't have permissions to send it as James Reed, and so it still says that it was on behalf of. And so that's nice. That's good to know that this is working properly, that the permissions that we configured on the Exchange server are being enforced and applied when it comes to all of those different mailbox configuration settings. As you can see, there are certainly a lot of different mailbox configuration settings that can be applied. So we hope you found this informative. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.